Emily Gray, a pregnant widow with nothing left, took a desperate gamble and won a broken cowboy at an auction for pennies. Ryder Kane, shattered by his past and scorned by the town, seemed destined to crush her last flicker of hope. But fate had a different plan. Two lost souls, finding in each other the strength to rebuild what life had stolen. And just wait until you see how this powerful story twists toward a breathtaking ending where justice finally comes full circle. The air was thick with dust and whispers as Emily Gray tightened her grip on the worn leather strap of her purse. The midday sun scorched the small Texas town square, and yet the chill of 100 staring eyes sent a shiver down her spine. She felt their judgment like weight on her chest. To them, she was nothing more than a tragic curiosity, a young widow barely into her 20s, belly rounded with new life, standing alone at the edge of an old wooden stage. The townsfolk didn't hide their murmurs. "Why's she even here? Ain't she got enough trouble?" "Foolish girl, spending her last pennies on a man like him." But Emily's eyes didn't waver. She wasn't here for approval. She was here because she had no other choice. After the accident stole her husband and the bank claimed their small farmhouse, Emily had wandered between relatives' couches and shelters, always clutching the small ultrasound photo in her pocket, as if it could anchor her to a future. She wasn't. Sure she had. She'd heard about this auction 3 towns over, a desperate attempt by a failing ranch to sell off contracts for help in exchange for room and board. She hadn't expected much. Then she saw him, Ryder Kane. He stood apart from the others up for bid, shoulders hunched, arms crossed, a week's worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. His once proud cowboy hat lay forgotten on the stage beside him, dusty and battered like its owner. Even from this distance, Emily could see the deep lines etched around his eyes, not from age, but from a lifetime of regret. Ryder had been the talk of the county once, a champion rodeo rider with a grin that could light up any room. Now he was a shell, hollowed out by loss, branded by scandal no one dared mention aloud, but everyone remembered. The auctioneer's voice cracked like a whip, cutting through Emily's thoughts. "Lot 21, 6 months work contract, room included. You get what you see, folks. Starting bid, $500. Silence. Someone in the crowd let out a sharp laugh. "Ain't no one gonna pay $500 for that washed up has been." The auctioneer dropped the price. $400, 3. Still no hands raised. Ryder didn't flinch. His eyes, flat and lifeless, scanned the horizon as though wishing he could vanish into it. Emily's fingers trembled. She could hear her heartbeat pounding in her ears, loud enough to drown out the gossip around her. 200, 100. $50? The auctioneer said, almost pleading. Still, no one moved. A few people shook their heads. A woman in a floral dress whispered to her friend, "He's not worth a dime. Trouble follows him like a shadow." Emily's breath hitched. $50. It was all she had left. She stepped forward. "I'll take him." The words came out steadier than she felt. The crowd erupted in shocked gasps and a few mocking chuckles. The auctioneer blinked, then slammed the gavel down with relief. "Sold. Lot 21 goes to the lady." Ryder finally turned to look at her. For the first time, Emily met his eyes and recoiled slightly at the storm she saw there. Anger, resentment, and something darker she couldn't name. This wasn't gratitude. This wasn't even acknowledgement. But Emily straightened her shoulders. She hadn't come here to be welcomed or liked. She had come because she needed help, and maybe, just maybe, because she wasn't the only broken soul standing on that stage. The old ranch house creaked like it had a soul of its own, weary from years of storms and silence. Emily stood in the doorway, clutching a folded blanket to her chest, watching Ryder move about the small guest room. Or rather, watching him avoid her gaze as he tossed his duffel bag onto the narrow bed. The place was simple, peeling wallpaper, a cracked window, and a faint scent of cedar that clung stubbornly to the air. Emily had spent hours scrubbing and airing it out before his arrival, wanting it to feel like a fresh start. But as Ryder's boots scuffed against the warped floorboards, she wondered if any amount of effort could soften the edges of a man like him. "Dinner's at 6, she said gently. "There's stew on the stove and fresh bread." He didn't answer, just nodded once, curtly, and turned his back as he began unpacking. Emily hesitated in the doorway. She could feel the wall he'd built around himself, thick and cold as winter stone. It wasn't personal, she told herself. This man had lost too much. She'd heard the stories whispered in town, how Ryder Kane had once had a ranch of his own, how a fire took everything from him in one cruel night, how he walked away from what was left with nothing but scars and a reputation no one would forgive. But she had seen the flicker in his eyes at the auction. It wasn't much, barely a spark, but enough to convince her he wasn't completely gone. "Thank you for agreeing to stay," she added softly. This time, he paused. His shoulders stiffened like he was bracing for a blow. "I didn't agree," he said at last, his voice low and rough. "You bought me. Let's not pretend it's something else." The words stung more than she expected. Emily swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep her chin high. "I didn't buy you, Ryder. I offered you a place when no one else would." He said nothing, and the silence between them stretched, heavy and awkward. Emily finally turned to leave, her heart pounding with a cocktail of hurt and determination. She wouldn't let his bitterness scare her off. She had endured too much already: widowhood, poverty, the sideways glances of people who pitied her. She wouldn't give up now. In the kitchen, she stirred the stew absently, the spoon clinking against the pot. Her baby shifted within her, a small kick that reminded her why she was doing all this. She wasn't just trying to save Ryder Kane. She was trying to save herself. The night was quiet, except for the distant roll of thunder. Emily stood by the window, watching Ryder's silhouette near the barn. Even in the dim light, she could see how still he was, as if the weight of the world had pinned him in place. For days now, he'd worked from sunrise to sundown, fixing fences, clearing debris, tending to the land like it wasn't his heart that needed mending. But when evening came, he always drifted here, to the edge of the property, clutching that charred, battered hat like a lifeline. Emily stepped out onto the porch, pulling her shawl tighter. "You shouldn't be out here," she called softly. He didn't answer. Gathering her courage, she crossed the yard, her boots sinking slightly into the wet grass. The air smelled of rain and earth. She stopped a few feet behind him. "I know what it feels like to lose everything," she said gently. "But it doesn't mean you have to stay lost." Ryder's shoulders tensed. For a moment, she thought he might walk away, but instead he spoke, his voice low and strained. "My brother. I wasn't fast enough. I thought I could save him. I didn't." Emily's chest ached. She wanted to reach out, but she kept her hands at her sides. "You didn't fail him," she said quietly. "You survived. That's not weakness, Ryder. That's the start of something new." He didn't look at her, but his grip on the hat loosened slightly. A long silence stretched between them as the first drops of rain began to fall. Emily stayed there with him, unmoving. For the first time, she felt the smallest shift in the air. Not forgiveness, not yet, but the faintest possibility of it. Morning sunlight spilled across the fields, painting them in soft gold. Emily stood on the porch, hands resting on her rounded belly, and watched as Ryder worked near the paddock. There was something different about him now. His movements were steadier, his posture no longer weighed down by invisible chains. The transformation hadn't happened overnight. It had been a slow, almost fragile process, like coaxing a wounded animal out of hiding. Emily had offered kindness without expectation, and Ryder, in his own guarded way, had started to respond. He had repaired the broken fence along the south pasture and cleared the barn of years' worth of clutter. More than once, Emily had caught him sanding old wood planks late into the night, muttering under his breath as he measured and cut. Today, she finally saw what he had been building: a crib. It stood in the corner of the barn, simple but sturdy, crafted with care. Emily walked closer, her eyes stinging as she ran her fingers along the smooth rails. "You didn't have to do this," she said softly. Ryder straightened from where he was tightening a bolt. He looked almost shy for a moment, his usual guarded expression replaced with something gentler. "I wanted to," he admitted. "This place, it's given me more than I deserve." Emily met his gaze. "It's given me a second chance, too." A quiet settled between them, not awkward this time, but warm, filled with unspoken understanding. Later that evening, when Emily went into labor earlier than expected, Ryder didn't hesitate. He gathered supplies, saddled the old pickup truck, and drove her through winding back roads to the nearest clinic, his jaw tight with determination. He stayed by her side the entire time, his calloused hand holding hers as she fought through pain and fear. When the cries of a newborn finally filled the room, Ryder felt something break loose inside him, something he hadn't dared feel in years. Back at the ranch, days later, he stood in the doorway of Emily's room, watching her rock the baby. She looked up at him, tired but glowing. "You want to hold him?" she asked. Ryder hesitated only a second before stepping forward. The tiny bundle fit awkwardly in his arms, but when the baby's small fingers curled around one of his own, Ryder felt a lump rise in his throat. He whispered almost to himself, "I didn't think I'd ever have a place like this again." Emily smiled softly. "You do now. We both do." For the first time in years, Ryder believed her. The ranch wasn't just land and fences anymore. It was home. And for a man who thought he'd lost everything, that was more than enough.